Silverberg, Director of the Center for Nonprofit Studies at Austin Community College, and welcome to Civil Society, where we explore issues affecting our communal well-being through a nonprofit lens. We're a proud partner of ACC TV, but given COVID-19, we continue to operate virtually for this, our 5th season. This episode is part of a series on the Asian Pacific Islander experience in Austin, which includes people from at least 25 countries who represent 40 different ethnic groups. This diverse community makes up at least 8% of Austin's population and is growing rapidly. Asian Americans are often overlooked. Partly this could be attributed to the model minority myth, the assumption that all Asians are wealthy, highly educated, and therefore not needing social services. But income and education within the Asian community varies. Immigrants coming for professional opportunities and refugees starting from scratch are often lumped together. Also, language can be a barrier for people accessing social services. My guest today is Kirk Yoshida, the current chair of the Asian American Quality of Life Advisory Commission. He was appointed by Aura Houston, the former city council member for District 1 in 2015, and reappointed by council member Natasha Harper Madison. He's been serving as chairman of the commission since July of 2020. Kirk is currently the director of business intelligence with Strategic Partnerships, Inc., a business development firm for companies offering products and solutions to the public sector. He leads the firm's research activities, which include performing market assessments and competitor analysis, and performing and identifying public sector spending trends and contractor opportunities for clients. He also has expertise in local government bond initiatives. Prior to SPI, Kirk worked in various roles at the City of Austin, TxDOT, and the Railroad Commission of Texas. He also taught English in Japan to junior high and elementary school students as part of the JET program. And we'll ask him about that experience. Kirk holds a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of California at Irvine and received his master's degree in information studies from the University of Texas. Up until last year, Kirk served as a longtime volunteer for the Austin Steam Train Association, and he's also volunteered with Out Youth Austin. On a personal note, Kirk is a 27-year resident of Austin, beats me by 1 year, and lives in the Windsor Park neighborhood with his partner of 22 years, and of course their cat, Sammy. I asked Kirk to join us on Civil Society because of his role on the commission and because of his passion and leadership in civil rights and social action. Welcome, Kirk.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we go any further, Kirk, tell us a little about yourself. Talk about what it was like growing up as a Japanese American. I think you told me 4th generation.
That's right.
In California.
Right. So yeah, like Barry said, I'm a 4th generation Japanese American. So my great grandparents came over from Kyushu, the island of Kyushu in Japan in the 1920s. All of my family resettled in a farming community, Lindsay, California, which is in the San Joaquin Valley. But I grew up in Hayward, California. That's my hometown, which is, if you don't know, that's about a 15-minute drive south of Oakland. So, obviously California has quite a few Asians there. So I had the opportunity to, and also a very strong Japanese American community there as well. And so I had the opportunity to grow up around a Japanese community center. Mainly those activities focus around sports. So I played very poorly at basketball and also baseball. But we had a nice community center there with, food events, food fairs and things like that. So really good place to kind of grow up around other people in my culture.
So when one thinks about Japanese Americans and one takes an historical perspective, the one thing obviously that stands out has been the historic injustice when our government chose to intern Japanese Americans and alien Japanese during World War II. I'm assuming it affected your family. Talk about that. Talk about, how does that impact your identity as a person?
Sure. So actually, when I saw this question, I talked to my mom because it's not something we really talked about too much, and a lot of this, not I've had to do a little bit of my own research or just start asking some questions because really, as a kid, and my mom had the same experience actually, because she was born in one of the internment camps, but was very small, obviously when the war was over and they were allowed to return, home or wherever that home turned out to be after that. And so, family members would talk about camp, but not really explain what that was. And so I had this other idea of what camp was. And my mom also, we were talking last night, she's like, yeah, I also, was like camp. And then, but she's like, my dad didn't like camping. So, how is it that I was born in in camp? And so, it's something when you're a kid, no one's really explained this to you, and you're just picking up things here and there. And it wasn't till I was older and actually heard my grandfather talk about that time. He was very instrumental in getting that movement around, getting reparations for that experience. He, did testify and was there for the signing. Ronald Reagan signed that
Wow.
act, and he flew out there for that. It was very important to him, and one day we had, I don't know if it was a family reunion or a holiday, but he would occasionally be known for giving speeches even to his own family, and he got up and started talking about this time, and I imagine it was around the time of the reparation thing. So he took the time to talk about that, and it was I think it's the first time I saw him get really emotional when he was describing that experience of being uprooted. His mom at the time was very ill with cancer, and so that move out there was very devastating. And she actually died, not in the camp, but when when the war was over, some people returned back to California, and they told others not to come back because it was too dangerous. And so I believe the government had set up kind of a temporary residence thing in Utah. And so I only learned this probably 5 years ago that my family spent a year in Utah in the interim between when they closed the camp and when they ended up returning back to California. And I think the other thing I would say on this is that even though quite a few Japanese returned to California, there was some disbursement. So a lot of these families were farmers and didn't have anything to go back to. And so it wasn't necessarily a given that you would need to go back to California since you're kind of starting over. And so my paternal grandparents ended up in Des Moines, Iowa, of all places. And so that's where my grandfather, my dad grew up. And so even though both sides of my family are from the same farming community in California, my dad actually grew up in Iowa, and got acquainted with my mother because he was visiting relatives back in that same small town, Lindsay, California. And they were both in college, and they were both home for she was home, my mom was home for the summer, my dad was just visiting other relatives. So anyway, so that's kind of that experience. One of the things that this pandemic did was I was supposed to go out and visit there was a tour that I was going to go on with some of my other family members to Arkansas, and they had built a program around the internment camp there. I think there's a museum, and we were going to go tour the facility, and so that was a way I thought I could get more educated on this, because like I said, I've just kind of picked up things here and there, different stories, but it's not, it's something that I think everyone was a little bit ashamed of. I mean, obviously it's an injustice that it happened, but there was a lot of shame attached to that about the treatment and thinking you were American and not being treated that way. And it was just something that a lot of that generation just didn't really want to dwell on, or they just wanted to move on from that experience.
Yep. Well, there's some comparisons, not in terms of the actual experience, but with Holocaust survivors who don't want to talk about it, or didn't talk about it. Has that family experience implicitly or explicitly affected your own activism, your own desire to assume the leadership role, for example, at the commission?
I mean, I don't think so. So I
That's a
think,
fair answer.
and I think a lot of that has to do with my maternal grandfather, who, even before the war was very active in the community. And then when he returned to that same town of Lindsay, uh, just kind of devoted. I mean, he was a farmer first, and then he was an insurance salesman after that. But he really devoted his life to community service. And I really got a taste for that when he died. He had always told me that I was the oldest grandson, and it's just kind of a weird thing to tell like a 6-year-old that you're going to give your grandfather's eulogy at his funeral. But that's exactly what did happen, and it was overwhelming, the amount of people that showed up for this funeral. It listed all the organizations that he was involved with, and I mean, it took up a whole page of the program there,
Mhm.
and anything from Kiwanis to, God, I don't know. I know that was his big one, but it was dozens and dozens of different community organizations that he was involved with, and I think that kind of filtered down to his children. So my mom and my aunts and uncles, and with me. And so really, even though he's been dead for 30 years plus, it's always really stuck with me, the importance of giving back to the community, being involved in the community. And so I would say that more than anything else has inspired me.
So you come by this activism honestly. All right. Uh,
I mean,
so
and I think too, just personally, I feel I don't. I mean, it's hard to really kind of define everything, like motivations for everything. But I've just always really, yeah. I went to a Catholic high school. Volunteering was a requirement as part of that. So I mean, I started volunteering as a young teenager, really, and just try to continue to do that throughout, wherever I was, whether it was in college or here in Austin. I just think it's just important to have that connection to the community, and to give back. If you're in the position to give back, certainly there's just so many different ways that you can do that. You can, I try to also, push myself to, do things that I'm interested in, but I'll also push myself sometimes to do things that don't necessarily align with my interest, just to meet other people, to kind of get out of my own bubble, and kind of challenge myself to meet other people, and learn about different communities and stuff.
super. So tell us a little bit about the Asian American Quality of Life Advisory Commission.
Sure,
Just quickly, why it was created, what it does.
sure. So there were a couple like precedents for it, right? There was a Hispanic Latino Quality of Life Commission, and African American. I think it's the Resource Advisory Commission is their name. And so in 2014, and I think there's an organization here. It's a network of Asian American organizations, NAOO. They're very instrumental in getting the Asian American Resource Center, our facility, our cultural facility, getting that project underway. And then I think there's also a big push to get a city commission together. And so that was created by a city ordinance in 2014, started meeting in 2015. And the mission of that is to advise on the AARC, so our facility, but then also to advise the city on issues related to Asian American quality of life in Austin. So that's the mission of this organization. It's been meeting since 2015, and then I joined, I think it was in October of 2015. I, I was recruited to join. I think that they were having problems making quorum. There just weren't enough appointments hadn't been made quickly enough, and they were having problems making their meetings. So I think at first I was a warm body, but I was also told that they really thought that my business experience was something that I could bring to the organization. And then also just being involved with public sector and understanding public sector budgeting and things like that would be helpful to the commission. And so really that was kind of my role when I first came on, was to take a look at, because we are allowed to have input into the budget process. And so that was the first thing that I was assigned to do, was to work on that, and working with the city to improve that process, which has, along with the other commissions, has really evolved over the past 5 years.
What are some, I know that, and we'll put the link up on this episode, that there's a lot of, the commission has issued a number of reports on the quality of life, upon health inequities and so forth. Yeah. What are some of the current initiatives that you think that people will be interested in knowing about?
Sure. So let me just start by saying that once the commission started meeting, one of the first things, right, is to understand the community and the challenges of the community. And so the city commissioned a study, kind of actually 3 parts to it. There was a report on health, and then there was a quantitative study that was done by the University of Texas. And then there was also more of a qualitative part of it too, that was conducted by the city public information office. And so those 3 things combined, we refer to as our quality of life initiative. And so that gave us the data and the ammunition to start formulating some of our priorities and things that we work on. And so those have evolved over time. Obviously, one of the things that we focused on initially was around translation and interpretation. And so how do we address some of these barriers to accessing city services? So that's one. And then I think another thing that was, I don't know if it was a bit of a surprise, but it was a surprise to me, the issue around mental health and the Asian American community, and also the stigma attached to that. And so I think it was 2 years ago, we worked on a budget initiative around funding for that. It was actually combined with the LGBTQIA Commission, joint funding for mental health services. So not a huge amount of funds, but definitely a start. But that's something that out of that study we learned was a big issue in our community, and it's not just our community, right? But I think the community does have a little bit more stigma around seeking those types of services. We found that a lot of our community tend to seek out assistance from cultural groups or religious organizations rather than seek out medical services. So part of this funding we're trying to do is to provide more culturally relevant, more culturally accessible mental health services to try to break down some of those barriers. But we've also, if I can take a second, we're organized around work groups. So we have different commissioners focused on different priority areas. So we have people looking at HR. So we've been in meetings with the fire department, which is really trying to beef up their participation rates from the Asian Americans in recruiting new people for the fire department. It's very low so far, and so they've asked for our assistance there. We have a group looking at arts and culture, and so they work on some of the sister city initiatives, but also there's a big push for more cultural arts space I mean, it's all across the city, but this group is focused on the needs of the Asian American community. We have a group focused on pushing through budget items and then following up once that money is funded, and making sure that that money is getting used in the right way that most benefits our community. We have a group that's looking at policing. So one of the things that, so I was appointed chair in, I think it was July. And, this was a big issue. And I felt like we really needed to have a group looking at that. Part of it was I just didn't want to be caught off guard. And it was, things are evolving so quickly. And so I really felt like it was a big enough issue where I really wanted some people focused on this and trying to figure out what is the Asian American perspective on this, and I saw a lot of activity on Facebook, and especially like younger Asian Americans really trying to get involved with some of these issues around social justice and policing. And so I really felt like it was important for us to do that. And then the last group we have is around health and community engagement. So it is us taking what we know, what we've learned about working with the city, getting out of the community, and really informing them of what services are available to them, helping them kind of break through any issues that they have accessing those services, keeping them abreast of developments going on around some of these big issues. And then it doesn't quite make sense, but it's just because of the makeup of this team. But we also have this same group looking at all of the issues around health, which is very important to our community.
So given the diversity of the Asian community, I mean, just calling it the Asian community hides a lot of diversity, language diversity, the age diversity, the socioeconomic status. What are some of the challenges that the commission is facing?
Yeah. So I think there are some challenges. I think there's also some opportunities there for, with this diversity. So I think the number one challenge there with this diversity that I see is with the language, right? And it really became apparent when we have this, this I'm calling it like this weather related disaster that our city faced last week, and how difficult it was to get information out that's translated, right? It's going to take us a while to unpack everything that happened. I know that the city was very hampered because, people were working from home that were involved in some of this emergency communication, and then they had their power go out. So obviously there are some barriers there, but the community really stepped up. Some commissioners really stepped up in getting some of these materials translated. So information about the warming centers, information about the water situation, other types of emergency services that people need, what to do if you have a burst pipe in your house from the freeze. That information was available in English and Spanish, but the community really stepped up to translate those materials. But unfortunately, a lot of those materials weren't available till like Thursday or Friday of that week. And so even though there was this big rush and this big push, some of that, would have been a lot more helpful had it gone out, obviously sooner. So that's a challenge. And it's not, it's what languages do you do that in? I think we were able to, gosh, I think it was 8 or 10 languages that they ended up doing, but there's so many more. And so which ones do you choose and everything? So, that's going to be an ongoing challenge and something that we're going to be focused on. And we're going to be scheduling meetings with, the Public Information Office and others. We just need to understand what the process is, and then we can figure out what to expect. And, obviously, the community is ready to fill into those gaps. We need to know what those gaps are, right? And so there's going to be some focus around that. But I do see a lot of opportunity around, it's kind of maybe this like strength in numbers group, but I really feel like the Asian American community is very supportive. All the different groups are very supportive of each other. I do feel like there is this sort of group identity of Asians in Austin. I think having this cultural center really helps to cultivate that. And so, we are obviously still a growing community here in Austin. And I see a lot of opportunity there as well.
So
More
there's
so than focusing on all the challenges around the different groups.
so one of the things that probably has affected the Asian community more than others because of prejudice has been the pandemic, COVID, and so forth. Um, are you familiar with acts of aggression against Asian Americans in Austin?
Yeah,
And
so I know of at least three. I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch more, but I'm aware of at least three incidences. They've been brought to our attention through other people, or they've been shared on social media, and then they've come to our attention. So we're very aware of that. A lot of it happened right at the beginning, and a group of commissioners, we put out a statement, and we actually made a video just with a message of kind of we're all in this together, and letting the community know also that some of this stuff is going on, and just to be aware of it. What we don't know is how much is not reported, right, of individual um, acts of aggression or things like that. So I'm sure there's a ton of underreporting there. But we're just in an environment right now where some of this behavior has been encouraged, I want to say, and not just in our community, but in other communities. There's been acts of aggression towards minority communities, in the African American community, in the Hispanic Latino community, and so I think it's been elevated across all of these different minority groups, and it's something that I think people need to stand up to, and not just in Austin, but everywhere, and so I'm hoping that moving forward we're able to get around this, but it's going to take some time. I think we've been in this environment where people have felt emboldened to act out in certain ways, and um, you know, I think it's something that's always it's been there, but this environment has encouraged it. So it's
it's been
certainly something
legitimized.
to watch moving forward, but I don't think that we're at that place yet where we really kind of know where all of this is going. I don't know if we're headed in the right direction or not.
So in your role as commission chair, I'm assuming you're called upon to interpret the interests and needs of the community from time to time. Um, what do you think the most important things that non-Asian Austinites ought to know about the community, other than the language issue, which you've already mentioned?
Mhm. Well, number one, I think we have a lot. So I guess this kind of plays into the model minority thing, or what people think of as Asians. But one of the things that I think people might not be aware of is how many Asian immigrants and refugees that we have here in Austin. I believe that we had one of the largest placements of like Syrian refugees, for example. And so part of the challenge for our commission is kind of learning about these pockets of refugees, of lower income Asian American groups, and making sure that they aren't left out. Obviously, we have issues here related to cost of living, to affordable housing, and so these communities need assistance, but we need to be able to know where they are too, and so that's one of our challenges. And I think that actually the work there, I got to give a shout out to the group of people that worked on the census here in Austin, focused in on getting Asian Americans counted, because they were the ones that were out there in the community. They were the ones that observed some of the issues going on. One of the leaders of that initiative brought to our attention the issues in the Runberg corridor, the lack of access to broadband, really, that was affecting people's ability to work during the shutdown, to work remotely, but also to get their kids online for school through AISD. And so I think that is one of the things that I would like people to be aware of, that when we talk about the Asian American community, we're talking about a huge continent that stretches from Japan all the way to through the Middle East. So we do we do have this very diverse group of people that we are trying to service through the commission.
So knowing what you know today, okay, all the experiences you've had, what you're involved in today, what would you say to your younger self about your future? And what do you wish you had known when you started this journey that's led you to this, well, real responsibility as chair of the commission?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that probably a lot of people go through this, but I certainly had maybe kind of like an idealistic view of I don't know, kind of what you do when you grow up, and also kind of like actually like how much actually, because I didn't really care about making a ton of money. Like when I was younger, I just felt like I just need to be able to get by and all that. Well, it actually is quite a bit of money that you need just to get by,
Yes.
and especially here in Austin too. And so I think I had some kind of very like idealistic views around maybe even around like activism too, and things that you can accomplish through just working with government and trying to develop policies and things like that. So I would probably go back and try to maybe talk to a lot more older people about how they've navigated. I really had a struggled in my 20s to figure out what am I doing with my life. I had gone to graduate school in public affairs and didn't finish that degree, and was kind of like trying to figure out what I can do as a career and things like that. And so I think probably a little bit more discipline and focus would have been kind of more beneficial to me. I kind of floundered around. I did find my way eventually, and I know a lot of people kind of have to go through that process on their own. It just maybe took me a little bit longer than I would have wanted to. But I think I would just tell myself, just hang in there. It'll work out fine. Just continue to do things that you think are of value. And I think, maybe some of my lack of focus has allowed me to do some kind of interesting, it's definitely made me suffer in some ways, let's just say that. But I think it's also allowed me to have some pretty cool experiences, just being that open-minded to almost anything.
Well, as we all find out, adulthood isn't the stack of pleasantness that it's looks like when you're a kid, huh? I can't use the proper words online. So adulthood really is. So let me to bring our interview to a close, let me ask you probably the most profound question that I have in my list of questions. What is it about steam engines?
Okay, so I
Caused
can
you to volunteer?
I can answer that one. So I was really looking for a different kind of opportunity, and I certainly found one. So I had worked for some social service organizations here, volunteering. Very important work that these groups do, but I really did get burned out, And so I had gone into my little year stint in Japan teaching English. I came back to Austin. I'd been here about a year. I was working again. I went back to the same organization I was working with before. And I felt like I had some time to give, but I was like, I want to do something different. But I didn't know what that was. And I literally found this thing on Craigslist, and it was looking for volunteers for the Austin Steam Train. And, like everybody else, when you mentioned that, you're like, we have a steam train, and so I just started volunteering with this group. I liked trains as a kid. What I didn't realize is that my interest in trains would be superseded by like lifelong obsession. So I thought I had an interest in trains, but these people that work on the trains, I mean, they're into the modeling and all of that. I don't have any model trains or anything like that, but I did like them as a kid. But really, it was just kind of a different way to provide service to the community. I have a job where I have like a desk job. I don't have a lot of I have interaction, but not like on that kind of client services level, which is something I actually enjoy. And so I enjoy doing this. And what you do is people sign up for these. I don't know if people know this, but so in Cedar Park, there's a vintage rail line, and it's run by the Austin Steam Train Association. They actually did have an operating steam train for a while. It's been out of service, and I think it's getting pretty close to coming back online. But they spent quite a bit of time and energy trying to repair that. But in the meantime, we had these vintage rail cars that were just being pulled by a diesel engine, basically. But it's kind of a fun family experience. We do a lot of special events around we have Christmas runs, we have runs out to the hill country, and there's special events around food for adults, murder mystery things, food and wine kind of things too, special events too. So just a fun way to meet people, just to do something kind of outside of always thinking about yourself, and just, focusing on in helping people have a good time, right? Helping families have a good time on this event. So it's something that I did for, when I do something, it ends up being for a long time. So I have to be really careful about what I pick. But I really enjoyed it. My time on the commission has really taken away from that. It's something that I'm trying to focus in on, and especially now being chair, it requires, my full attention, and I always feel like I'm not giving enough to that. So I've had to back away from that, and I'm kind of just supporting them now by donating funds. But it's something that I did enjoy for 10 years, and I encourage people to check it out. Austin Steam Train Association. Take a weekend ride, look for our events around Thomas the Tank Engine, and also around some of our Christmas holiday runs too.
Well, thank you. I've actually taken the train. And
Oh, great.
Delight. It's a real delight.
Yeah, it is.
So thank you very, very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you all for watching and participating in civil society. And as always, thank you to Kate Tolliver, our managing producer, for her support. You can read more about Kirk Yoshida and the Asian American Quality of Life Advisory Commission and the issues we discussed, including links to their website, and view previous and future episodes of Civil Society at nonprofitaustin.org/civil society. Thank you very much. Y'all have a great day.